Good evening or afternoon, as the case may be, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Drunk Agile. As always, my name is Daniel Vacanti, and with me is representing Santa Barbara.
Yeah, Prateek Singh. How's everyone doing?
As is tradition, we got to kick things off by talking about the whiskeys that we will be enjoying today. Prateek, I think the further tradition is that you start.
Yeah, so today is again whiskey with an E. It's a bottle of Blanton's, which is about to end its reign. So stop starting, start finishing. So let's finish this thing.
That bottle was full before we started recording, by the way.
Yeah, pretty much.
I'm trying to decide if I'm going to be embarrassed by this week's my selection this week. I wanted to pay homage to a good friend of ours. His name is Steve Porter. He probably was going to regret that we mentioned his name out loud. But Steve lives in Winnipeg, Canada, of all places, and the Crown Royal Distillery is just right up the road or down the road from him. I don't know. Everything's backward in Canada, so who knows if it's up the road or down the road from him. But I didn't go with the traditional Crown Royal. Everyone will be happy to know. I went with what's called their Northern Harvest Rye. Now, the huge advantage of Canadian whiskey is, of course, Canada spells their whiskey properly. There is still no E, so that's probably the only thing that they've got going for them. But this is their Northern Harvest Rye. Apparently, it's won awards. Whatever. It's 45%, and with all due respect to Canadian whiskey, I can't drink that stuff straight. So I ended up just making myself an old fashioned. So I don't know if this is cheating or not. Forgive me, please forgive me for this. But at least I have a no E whiskey, and my streak is alive. So yeah, cheers.
Cheers.
Okay, today's edition is we're continuing on our discussion about value and more importantly, prioritization schemes, selection schemes to optimize value, or optimize is probably a better word than maximize. So to optimize value. And so in the previous edition, again, assuming that we're doing these in order, in the previous edition of the episode, we talked about concepts like cost of delay, and weighted shortest job first algorithms like cost of delay divided by duration, or CD3, as a means for trying to bring that value dimension into these conversations. Cost of delay and CD3, things like weighted shortest job first, CD3, are pretty widely touted anymore. They're pretty almost I would argue, commonly accepted means of prioritization based on value, or proxy for value, however you want to say it. And we spent a lot of time in the last episode talking about why those things are potentially problematic. But we want to get into the nuts and bolts of those things this time. So to maybe hopefully drive the point home about, there's certain things you really, really have to be careful about when you start talking about cost of delay and CD3. And usually those things aren't really quite valid in your context. So I don't know, Prateek, do you have anything to say before we kick things off? Or
we did a whole bunch of math last time to show that
because math.
Because math. But hopefully this time we'll do a little more math. But hopefully this time we'll base it in more empiricism than the math that we did last time. So.
Yep, we're probably going to show a whole bunch of numbers that aren't going to mean anything to you. Honestly, they don't mean anything to me. So
just like last time.
So let's kick it off. The metaphor. Prateek and I wrote an article about this, published it on Medium. I don't know, year-ish ago. I don't know, maybe 2 years. I don't know. I've done some talks on this, so maybe you guys have maybe everybody's watching has seen this. But the metaphor that we like to use to explain how prioritizing based on value up front. So I mean, a fundamental problem of prioritization is you're trying to make these decisions about value, decisions about risk, decisions about all these things when you have the least amount of information, right? So you've got all these candidates sitting in your backlog or your options pool or whatever you call it. You have very, very, very little information about these. And yet we're trying to make these prioritization decisions when we have the least amount of information. And it was probably about 2 years ago that Prateek and I were both reading the book Misbehaving by Richard Thaler. And in that book, he references an article that he wrote where he consulted on, or I know he consulted with some teams, and then they ended up writing
with the Redskins, I think.
Yeah, we don't want to talk about that because Redskins are a good team. We don't want to talk about them. We don't talk about I don't know, maybe let's say it's the Cowboys or something.
Dolphins.
Yeah. Where with a national football, we're in America here, so we're America. So we're going to talk about the National Football League, where he talked about how the National Football League teams select players. And so we kind of really have to talk about, the nuances. The National Football League has what's called a draft. Every year they have what's called a draft, where teams get together and they select new players. So we kind of got to talk about the nuance of that. But the analogy is essentially the same, where you've got these NFL teams that are going to go out and spend millions, tens of millions of dollars, potentially hundreds of millions of dollars on these players. And they're trying to make these decisions on which players to select and in what order, having never seen any of these players ever play one professional game of football in their life.
Yeah.
So we want to talk about, I'm going to bring this up. I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully this will work. I can share my screen. As you can see, as always, we're ready. We're always absolutely ready with this one. Share screen and that and share. Okay, so let me know. Prateek, can you see this?
Yep.
Okay, so we're going to talk about the NFL draft. And the way that the NFL draft works is kind of as follows. And by the way, we're going to talk specifically about the 1999 draft. But the way the NFL draft works is there are, in 99, I don't know if there were 28 or 32 teams. I can't remember if they had the expansion teams yet. But anyway, there's a number of teams. Right now, there's, I think, 32 teams that participate in this draft. And they are given an order. And typically, by default, the order in which teams select players is based on their win-loss record from the previous year. So the team with the worst record usually gets to select first in the next year's draft. Now, teams can do things like, trade and all this stuff that might change order. But by default, order is set by the team with the worst record the previous year gets to select first. And so what happens is there's these pool of players, usually from generally speaking, they're from college. Football players, American football players will play 4 years in college, and then they'll 4 or 5 years, and then they'll enter the NFL draft. And then each NFL team gets to pick one player, and then the next in line picks another player, and then the next in line picks another player, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, until all 32 teams have picked, and that's one round of the draft. And then they do it all over again, right? And there are multiple rounds. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I don't know.
I think 8 or 9.
Yeah. So in the 99 draft, which should be no surprise to anybody, the Cleveland Browns were had the overall number 1 pick. The Philadelphia Eagles had the number 2 pick. And by the way, I think we saw that. I think the Cleveland Browns they've had of the past 20 years since then, they've had 18 of the number 1 picks or something. I don't know. We should go look that up. Yeah. That's kind of fun. With all due respect to Cleveland people out there. Or not, as the case may be. The Cincinnati Bengals were number 3. The Indianapolis Colts were 4. All this is interesting, but what we really care about is a team called the New Orleans Saints. And they were all the way down there at number 12. Right? So the Saints had the number 12 pick overall. Well, in 1999 is a special year for all kinds of reasons, not least of which was their head coach that year was a guy by the name of Mike Ditka. Now, Mike Ditka it was infamous by this time. I wouldn't say he's famous, but he was infamous at this time. Well-known player, well-known coach, had won the Super Bowl with the 1985 Chicago Bears. Went over to the Saints, and the Saints gave Ditka, pretty much unilateral power to do what he wanted to do in order to shape the New Orleans Saints team. So now entering the 1999 draft, Ditka took a look at how the Saints were, and he had his mindset that the only thing that was preventing the Saints from winning a Super Bowl was a decent, competent, or powerful running game. Right? Now you kind of have to understand the nuance of American football, but just know he wanted a player that was known as a running back, and the particular player that he wanted was a guy by the name of Ricky Williams. Now this is kind of a sign of the times. I don't, this is from ESPN magazine. I don't even know if ESPN magazine still exists, and I don't know if this color they would get away with this cover at all, going forward now. But this was the cover of ESPN. Mike Ditka wanted Ricky Williams so bad that he was willing to bet the whole draft on it, right? And so what he did, which is really kind of fascinating, in that 1999 draft. So remember, so that was the original order I showed you before, had the New Orleans Saints picking number 12. The problem is Ricky Williams is a pretty popular player. So if the Saints are picking number 12, the chances of did I say that right? Ricky. If the New Orleans Saints are picking number 12, the chances of Ricky Williams still being around for the 12th pick, very, 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 very slight. So Ditka had to do something to be able to trade up to get a much, much, much earlier pick. So to do that, so what he did is he traded up from the 12th pick to the 5th pick in the first round, right? And in order to go from 12th to 5th, what he had to do was he literally, so remember we said there were multiple rounds of picks. He literally gave away all of the Saints' other picks, right? Not just the first round, but all rounds, all subsequent rounds in that 1999 draft. And he gave up the first and third pick in the next year's draft, in 2000's draft, right? So he gave away what is this, 10-ish picks?
Yeah, he's bet the house on this thing.
Because he's like, I am so certain. I understand that what the Saints need is a running back, and I am so certain that this is, Ricky Williams is going to fix all these problems. But like Prateek says, I am just going to bet the farm and make that happen. So that's essentially what he was saying. What Ditka was essentially saying in this trade is, I understand upfront value so well that I am willing to put in place this strategy to make that value a reality. So hopefully this sounds familiar, right? This is where, again, he's making this decision again. Remember, Ricky Williams had never played, when Ditka's making these picks, Ricky Williams had never played a game, a minute, a second of professional football in his life. Yeah, he'd played some college ball, but he'd never played professional football ever in his life. And yet Ditka was willing to make this bet. And on top of that, not only did he give away all these picks, but they went in and they paid Ricky Williams, tens of millions of dollars. I'm sure they signed a contract with him was tens of millions of dollars. So Prateek, I don't know if can you take us through why is this type of thinking problematic? I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
There are a few things to this, right? One, it's not that Ditka is going in blind, right? He has, NFL is one of those places where for someone never to have played a single second in the NFL, you have so much information about them, their college record. You have all the tape of them playing in high school, in college. You have the combine where they come and try out and they show things. You have all this info and you have judged the value of this player based on all that info. He's not going in completely blind.
Right.
So in essence, what he's saying is, I have all this info, I have collected all this information, and based on that, I believe I'm judging value really well. And because I can judge value really well, and this is what I need, I am willing to put all my chips in on this one pick. And I'm hoping this sounds kind of familiar, and you can draw some parallels here. I think we have a tendency of doing that, to say that because we have spent a good amount of time figuring out how valuable something is, we can now probably say that, hey, because we spent this time figuring out how valuable this is and we have all this information, this is a safe bet at this point. I can make this bet.
Obviously, yeah. But sorry, go ahead.
No, what I was going to say was, we talked about this a little bit last time, that we cannot be actually we've talked about this multiple times. We cannot be thinking about the world in such a deterministic manner to say that we absolutely know what the value of something is. And that's exactly what Ditka is doing in this instance, at least.
By the way, just as a quick aside, we forgot to mention the third member of our trio.
Oh.
We were, like the most famous.
Yeah.
the most famous participant in this is Nisha. There's Nisha, as you can see. She's engaged as always. This is probably how
she always is.
This is probably how most of our audience is as they're listening to us.
Yeah, I was telling Dan just before we started that if she starts dreaming, you'll start hearing little barks. She barks when she dreams. So.
Okay, so Prateek, I'm hearing a hint of sarcasm in your voice that you're saying that even though we do all these calculations and we do all these estimations and we do all this, we have all these conversations about value, that we really don't know anything about values. Is that what you're telling me? Is that
so?
How can you prove that?
That's the thing. I can say it, but it's one thing to say it. It's another to kind of prove it. And as for those who have been listening to us, who have watched earlier episodes, you would know that one of our favorite tools for proving these things out is to essentially run simulations, run some Monte Carlo simulations, and see what the results are. So I'm going to take you through. We did exactly that. I'm going to take you through the results of what happens if in all the different cases of when we assume that we know value and we prioritize by that, or if we use something like CD3, or if we use something like just prioritizing by duration, or if we randomly prioritize things, and let's see what the results are. So I'm going to start sharing,
and we should say, I mean, the simulation that we're doing here is kind of roughly based on some real world examples. It's, believe it or not, it's surprisingly difficult to validate value, which is one of the reasons why we'll show you. It's one of the reasons why CD3 is so problematic. But I just want to emphasize, instead of just Prateek and I just spouting out our opinion, let's try and back that up with some type of science anyway.
Yeah.
So
and as I said, this is the more empirical type of science, rather than we have these pretty distributions from which we're sampling and all that kind of stuff.
Did we talk? I think we did talk about curve fitting before.
We did talk about that.
Anyway, okay.
And as usual, we're fully prepared for this. So Dan, I'm not able to share my screen.
Oh yeah, some smart person has actually locked down. And
meanwhile, while Dan's doing that, there's Nisha again.
So okay, you should be able to see if you can.
Perfect.
You should be able to. Thank you, Zoom, for all the new security protocols that you've implemented.
Hey, it's probably for the best.
Probably.
Yeah. All right. So before we go any further, let's set up the simulation. We're gonna have multiple of these projects that last anywhere between 0 and 20 weeks, and they can bring in, and again, these numbers are just random. You can substitute this for anything. It could be 0 to 20 days, whatever, and they can bring in $0 to $10,000. We intentionally did not take in negative, but we do know projects can have negative value.
Just that's an important point, and I'm just going to keep interrupting you because that's what I like to do. You guys know that. That's an important point that we did the lower bound on.
Gives me a chance to drink.
Yeah, the lower bound on this was 0, right? And obviously in the real world, whatever that means, projects lose money, right? There are projects out there that lose money, but the results would have been really, really so bad, I think, had we included negative, that nobody really would have bought the argument.
We wanted to leave it somewhat believable.
Yep.
Yeah.
So we purposely capped it or capped it. What's the opposite of capped? We
shoot it?
Uncapped it at 0.
Yeah. So the floor on this was 0. The ceiling was 10,000. And we could, again, substitute your values here. The results will probably not change much when you change that range. We also made a few other very realistic assumptions that that we believe are true, which is new projects show up every 2 weeks. So when you're doing your prioritization, you're looking out a certain number of weeks, certain number of days. Usually in that case, you don't assume that new things are going to show up. For these simulations, just like in the real world, we had new projects show up every 2 weeks. And we run the whole program for 40 weeks and then compare what are the results of 3 different prioritization streams. One is CD3, which we have talked about quite a bit, which is cost of delay divided by duration. The second was just purely by duration. What happens if we just do the shortest job first? And the third was random. What if we randomly pick up a job and work on that? How does that make a difference? So essentially, for the first 4 bullets you see there, they are static for most of the simulations. The last bullet, that's the one that changes: CD3, duration, or random. So in the very first round of these simulations, what we did was we said, let's assume that this is the perfect world and things go exactly the way that we had assumed when we planned. So in other words, we could accurately predict what the value of something would be, which I'm hoping you guys kind of have already gotten a hint is a hard thing to do. We can accurately predict duration, which if you've watched any of our previous videos, you would know that accuracy and that precision both in that are pretty hard. And nothing new is going to show up. So we know exactly how long each project will take, exactly how much money each project will bring in, and we will not get interrupted, or no new options are ever going to show up throughout this 40-week cycle.
So yeah. Okay. So can I, if I can ask a question very quickly, because I'm looking at this, and the first time I've really seen this. Accurately is probably the wrong word here. We're actually saying deterministically here, right?
Yeah, deterministically. Yeah.
Yeah. If we're saying that
accurately and precisely.
Yep. Yeah. So we're saying at the time of project selection, at the time of its prioritization, let's say that we have project A, and we're assuming it's going to make $8,332. Mm-hmm. That by the time it finishes and when we deliver it, it's going to make exactly $8,332. Yep. Project B is going to make $5,000, and when it's delivered, it'll right. So we're saying we are determined, right? It truly is a perfect world, which we know.
You're absolutely right. It's not just accurate; it's also precise. It's yep. Absolutely deterministic. We know we have a crystal ball that tells us exactly what's going to happen.
Okay, cool. So what happens?
In this case, when we live in a perfect world, CD3 outperforms everything else, like by a long shot. Like the value delivered by working in ascending order of duration, by working in random order, working these projects in random order, is way, at least random order is absolutely way lower. And working in duration order is definitely 10 to 15% lower than the value we would get out of CD3. These numbers don't really mean much. Again, as I said, they're based on the ranges we picked, but the percentages are probably the bigger deal, which is, in general, CD3 outperforms everything else in that perfect world. When we can deterministically know what the value of a project would be, deterministically know how long it will take, and for sure know that nothing else is going to show up.
And this is exactly, what you would expect, right? There's a reason that CD3 exists. And in the last episode, we talked about the three assumptions that Prateek just mentioned. It's like, we know value up front, we know duration up front, no new projects show up. When those assumptions are in place, and they're always in place, then CD3 does blow everything away. This makes total sense. It should, right? There's a reason CD3 exists. So yeah.
It should. Mathematically, it absolutely should. When you know those 3 things, as we said last time, I don't know of a better way to do prioritization if you are sure about those three things.
But what if I'm not so sure?
Yeah, what if I'm not so sure? What if we're not living in this world where CD3 outperforms both ascending, duration, and random? Let's move forward, and what if we are in a spot where value is not deterministic? What happens then? And what happens if duration is not deterministic? What happens if new options are showing up? So this particular simulation is where value is being reassessed every time we are delivering something, but duration is still being kept deterministic. But this is just a switch from saying that we're not able to actually determine value. We were at a place where we were able to determine value, but now we cannot determine value anymore. We're just making that one change. We're changing value to be non-deterministic. We're still keeping the other two assumptions in place.
And so, and if I can clarify, and you correct me if I'm wrong here, we're still choosing value from that distribution of that range from 0 to 10,000. We're just saying at the beginning of the simulation when we're selecting projects. Remember, we're doing a CD3 calculation. We're trying to decide which one that we select, and it's assigned a value at that point. But then when we finish, we go back and we say, okay, now that it's finished, let's say
now that we've delivered it, how much value did it really bring in?
Yeah, and which may or may not, and usually isn't the same as that, but it's still within that same range.
It's still that same range, right? It's still exactly that same range, and whenever we're delivering this, we're actually going back there and reassessing how much value did this thing bring in.
Right.
Again, so of those three assumptions, these three assumptions that we mentioned, we're only changing that first assumption. The only thing that is not deterministic anymore is value. And when we do that, it turns out that working in ascending order of duration, working your shortest project first, outperforms CD3. As soon as we change value from being deterministic to probabilistic, it changes the scores for these essentially, and says ascending order of duration will give you the best bang for buck as compared to CD3. And random still is pretty much as far behind as it was before. That's still pretty bad compared to CD3.
Which should make sense. We're essentially throwing darts to say, hey, which one are we going to pick? So I don't know. I always like to pause and reflect on this, because I mean this is pretty profound here, right? Just by taking away the assumption that we don't know value up front. And I can tell you, as a product owner, as having been a product owner of a product company for however many years, I can pretty much guarantee you do not, in a product company anyway, you really don't know value up front. The second that you take value out of that equation, duration all of a sudden becomes paramount. I mean, that's and these numbers. I mean, to me, this result alone was actually quite surprising to me when we ran these simulations.
Yeah, and again, in my opinion, just because CD3 does take duration into account, I think that's the reason why it outperforms random. But when you only take duration into account in this world where value is non-deterministic, where we outperform CD3 just by using an ascending order duration.
Yeah, but remember, it's because the numerator is the most important. Just remember.
Okay. So we've changed one assumption. What if we change one more? Let's
change one more. Let's see what happens. Change one more.
Yeah. Well, so we dealt with the uncertainty on value. What if we made duration uncertain as well? Which, again, if you watched earlier videos of ours, you'll hopefully know already that we don't believe that duration is certain, and you shouldn't either. When duration is uncertain, when duration is not deterministic, the approach that we suggest that teams take is as a project keeps getting bigger, let's right size it. Let's make these projects smaller so that we can deliver something. Again, in this case, we're still saying value is non-determinant, and duration as it grows, we're starting to right size projects. So in this particular example, what we have said is anytime a project is greater than 5 weeks, if you go back earlier, you will see that a range of projects was 0 to 20 weeks, actually 1 to 20 weeks. Anytime a project is greater than 5 weeks, let's break that project up so that it can be smaller than 5 weeks. So we're essentially randomly breaking it up into smaller chunks as soon as we see a project that's bigger than 5 weeks. That is our way of dealing with non-determinism in the case of duration. So what the results you're going to see have value, which is non-determinate, and same thing with duration. But when duration gets above a certain size, we right size these projects. Right? In this case, things change actually quite a bit. In this case, the ascending order of duration starts outperforming CD3 almost as much as CD3 was outperforming random. In fact, random starts getting closer to CD3 than it had ever been. Do want to make one more point. When we break up these projects, we take the smallest project and put the rest in the backlog. Because again, we're doing this by ascending order of duration.
Right. So, okay. Sorry. And I think you made this point, but I want to make it clear. Just because we're saying right sizing, but not same sizing, right? So we're not saying that all projects that are going through this simulation, they're all going to be exactly 5 weeks. There's still randomness here, right? They're not all. We're saying, but the biggest they can get is that certain level. But there are still some that are going to be 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks. Right. There's still a bunch of randomness in here. And to your point, when we break it up, it's not that we're just ignoring that work. We're still putting it, on the backlog to be worked through later, as a smaller chunk. So okay.
Yeah, and just as I said earlier when we were setting up these simulations, nothing between the three results, nothing has been changed except for the prioritization scheme. So that resizing, the reassessing of value is happening in all three cases. All we are changing is the prioritization scheme. So we're right sizing and we are reassessing value. And in that case, just by switching prioritization schemes, it looks like we get about a 50% advantage by going just with ascending order of duration. By working the smallest project first, we get about 51% advantage over our CD3 sequencing, but CD3 is still better than random by about 18%. And I say about because, these look like exact numbers. They're not. I'm sure we run the simulations again, they'll come out a little different. Not very, just a little. So we've changed two assumptions. We've changed the assumption around value being deterministic and the assumption around size being or duration being deterministic. And with changing those two assumptions and bringing right sizing into the picture, what we know is just working in order of duration, working in ascending order of duration is about 50% more value generative than CD3 would be. To add to this, when we compare CD3 without right sizing to random with right sizing, we haven't shown these results yet, but that right sizing approach that we talked about, if you start doing right sizing, that's all you do. and we're reassessing that value at the end. If we start doing that, and at that point, and this is probably the most shocking result of it all, random selection, random prioritization, essentially throwing darts at a board, outperforms CD3 by about 180%. Which all we have done is introduced right sizing. So CD3 without right sizing versus random with right sizing. Those two scenarios, random with right sizing outperforms CD3 without right sizing by about 180%.
And so this is okay, this is quite shocking. I mean, I think because this is where we have to, we probably, and I don't want to speak for you, Prateek. I'll speak for myself, but you can join in if you want to. This is where we probably diverge from Don Reinertsen, a little bit. And again, with all, because I'll be honest with you, if there's one person that I would tell you to follow about this stuff, it would be Don Reinertsen. He is by far and away, heads and shoulders above everybody else in terms of his thinking on this. But what Don Reinertsen would come along and he would say is, he's, and I don't want to put too many words in his mouth, but he normally says, if you're going to quantify one thing, quantify cost of delay. And what these results are telling us, if you're going to invest energy in terms of your process improvement, it's not, the energy shouldn't be invested in quantifying cost of delay. The energy should be invested in right sizing your projects, which is generally speaking, I would argue, much easier even than cost of delay. If all you do is right sizing, you can be quite a bit more sure than, in terms of your overall performance, than if you were to invest a whole bunch of time and effort trying to quantify cost of delay. It's a huge result, I think.
I think, again, I believe that Don's math is unparalleled in this thing.
Yep.
The problem is not with the math that Don Reinertsen is bringing to the table. The problem is that we don't understand variability well enough. We don't understand probabilistic thinking well enough to be able to quantify cost of delay.
That's the capital we with the community. Thinking not me. Well,
yes,
I mean,
not just
specifically me in particular.
You do too, but yeah.
But the community, yeah,
we don't understand this well enough to quantify. So the best thing we can do is actually reduce that variability. And the way we reduce that variability is by right sizing. And even then, we are not good at quantifying value. So it's still going to be really hard for us to quantify cost of delay. And again, the math is not the problem. Our ability to actually put the value to those variables is the problem.
Yep. And that bears repeating, I think, for the 15th time, is, there are certain contexts where you can calculate cost of delay, and that calculation is fairly straightforward. Like highly regulated environments, like where if, the government passes a law and you're going to get fined $1 million if you're not in compliance by a certain date, pretty easy to calculate cost of delay in that situation. If you're under contractual obligation that, hey, I need to deliver this specific feature by this specific date, or I'm going to have to start paying penalties for not having it, right? Pretty easy to calculate cost of delay. And that's what we're saying is, in those contexts where you have this information, where you know that you have to have this thing by this date, so we know value and we know duration, CD3 is by far and away the way to go. You don't mess around. You do CD3. In the world where we don't know those things, which I would argue that's probably 99% of us, CD3 is generally speaking a waste of time. You're better off literally throwing darts, just picking stuff at random. Doesn't really even matter. Just pick stuff, work on it, but make sure you don't let it get too big, right? Make sure you're constraining it by right sizing. That's the fundamental result here.
Yeah, and I think I was talking to someone earlier. It's like if you asked me, if you put a gun to my head and asked me what are the two things you would tell any team, it'll be right size your work and limit work in progress. Mm-hmm. That's all. If you do that, you'll get results that look like this. that assure that you'll be able to deliver your most valuable things out there as quickly as possible.
Just as a quick aside for how bad we humans are at estimating duration. Before this call or before this talk or whatever, Prateek was like, what are we going to talk about? This, it's only going to be 10 minutes, right? So what are
I
we?
said 15.
Did you? I can't remember. So obviously this has been quite a bit longer than that, but I hope we've made our point. We've probably overmade it. We've probably continued selling after the close, which is a big no-no. But this particular episode is the culmination, I think, of the last 2 or 3.
Yeah.
Where we're trying to explain. I know there's a lot of people who you think are smart out there talking about cost of delay and CD3. I know there's a lot of frameworks and methodologies that are saying, hey, do this, do this, do this. All we're saying is take a step back, understand your context a little bit better. If you are in one of these contexts where you really don't know value and it's really hard to quantify it, if you're in one of these contexts where you really don't know duration, it's really hard to quantify it, CD3, things like cost of delay and CD3 are probably not your friend, right? As Prateek just said, you're much better off driving out some of this other variability first, much better off focusing on driving out that other variability first. And then you may find out, once you've got control of that variability a little bit better, you may find out you don't even need any of these other tools, which is my guess. That's what you'll find out. So
I think we are really good at convincing ourselves that we know things that we don't know. And that's what stops us from trying to drive out these variability. I think this is that whole no estimates thing. It's the same thing, just applied to both value and duration. We believe the more we talk about something, the better we can estimate it. The more information we have, the better we can estimate it. I don't know where that curve kinks, but there is a kink in that curve where after a certain amount of time, you're actually making things worse.
Right. And what's funny is, you bring up a very, very good point. It's strange that you bring up a good point. This is really mark the time and date.
Yeah.
Prateek actually brings up a very good point, because a lot of the objection we get to this, whenever we present this material, a lot of the objection, people say, well, you know what, cost of delay CD3 thing, it's really more about the conversation. It's really more about, surfacing some of these assumptions and having the conversation and things like that. And what's fascinating to me about that is the people who shout that the loudest are also the ones who shout the loudest against story points, right? Because most people would say, well, story points, yeah, maybe they're not so good at estimation for estimation, but it's all about surfacing the assumptions, right? And the reason that's so bad from a lean perspective is you don't drive out uncertainty by talking about stuff. That's not how you drive out uncertainty. You drive out uncertainty, first of all, by actually doing the work. But more importantly, you drive out uncertainty by getting it in the hands of your customer and getting that feedback as fast as possible. I'm going to steal Prateek's thunder, but one of his favorite sayings is, we need to find out how wrong we are as quickly as possible. You have to go into this making the assumption that you are wrong. And we need to find out how wrong we are as quickly as possible. That's the strategy that's going to make you successful. I'll give you the even though I stole your thunder and took I'll give you the last word as always. How would you like to wrap things up?
Yeah, again, do not make assumptions. That has been a theme throughout all the videos we've done. The more assumptions you make, the harder you make it for yourself to be correct, accurate, whatever you want to call it. And maybe next time we'll talk a little more about that. But as Dan said, if you're assuming that you have the exact right answer, and I think Dan will come back to did Ditka have the right answer? If you're assuming you have the exact right answer, that is a lot more dangerous than saying, hey, I don't know if I have the right answer, but I'm going to try something out.
Right. So yeah, I always forget to finish the Ditka story. I always forget. I'm like, because it's like to me, it's just so obvious what's going to happen by this point. It's so obvious. So we need to finish the Ditka story. Mm-hmm. I promised Prateek the last word. That was the last word on CD3 anyway. Yeah. The last word on Ditka, I'll probably take. So as you can imagine, the Ditka strategy was a complete and total failure. The Saints ended up losing more games the season after that they drafted Ricky Williams. They actually ended up losing more games than they did the season before. I think Ditka only lasted one more season with the Saints, and then he was fired. Right, he was just summarily fired, marched out the door. Took the Saints forever to recover from that. An even better example, though, is over the past 20 years, the argument could be made, not by me, but the argument could be made that the best quarterback in the NFL over the past 20 years, and potentially in the history of the NFL, is a guy by the name of Tom Brady, who used to play for the Patriots. He won, how many Super Bowls did he win? 4, 5, 6, whatever it is. Anyway, he won all these Super Bowls.
You mean the quarterback for Tampa Bay?
He's quarterback for Tampa Bay now, yeah. What was with won all kinds of Super Bowls. When he wasn't winning Super Bowls, he was winning division titles and playoff games and anything. Just winning all kinds. So he's probably easily the best quarterback from a winning perspective, the best quarterback of the past 20 years. Again, the argument could be made the best quarterback of all time. I would not make that argument, but whatever. With all of those accolades, with all of those wins, you would expect that the NFL would be like, this guy probably went pretty high in the draft. They had to know. How can a guy be that good and you not know? How could he possibly be that good and you not know? So he had to be first, second, third pick in the first round, right? Prateek, when did Tom Brady get picked?
Was it 199th?
190, yeah. It was in the sixth round.
Yeah.
They literally picked almost 200 players before Tom Brady. This guy, one of the greatest players of all time, they literally picked 200 players before him. Now you're trying to tell me if there's a guy sitting there that you know is going to win you 6 Super Bowls, and you're going to pick 200 people before him, and you're going to, with a straight face, tell me that you understand value. That's to me that tells you everything that you need to know, right?
What's amazing about that story is every time that story is told, it's told from the perspective of, look how good Patriots were. They recognized that this guy in the 6th round, 7th round, whatever it was, is still available, and they picked him up, as opposed to going, they had 6 picks before this guy and they didn't pick him.
Yeah,
there were 198 picks before this guy.
Something like 8 quarterbacks or something like that before Tom Brady too.
Before him.
And I think he's won more Super Bowls than the rest of them combined.
Combined easily. Yeah, probably double that.
Yeah, in fact, I don't know that any other ones.
But beyond that, it's again going back to the earlier point that you were making too, was that sure, none of these players have played a single second of NFL football, but these guys have a lot more beta testing results than most organizations do. They've seen them play in high school, in college, they've sent them to the combine, they've had the Wonderlic test, whatever, all that stuff. And they're basing their value judgment on all that information that they have. And they're still that wrong. And it's not just all that information, they're also putting in a whole bunch of money into this.
So did you say Wonderlic? There's got to be some joke in there about Wonderlic.
Yeah, I just
anyway, whatever. All right. Well, hopefully we've made the point. Hopefully we've stressed it enough. If you have any questions, we probably should tell people how to contact us. Maybe when we get around to publishing this stuff, there will be a way for you to contact us and ask us questions. We'll post a link.
We published it.
We'll post a link to the article that we wrote on this. Surprisingly enough, it's called "Don't Be a Ditka," and I think in the next episodes, in the coming episodes, we will start talking about some of these faults, if you will. It's probably wrong to call them faults, but faults in human behavior, right? Why we can't necessarily trust our instincts on some of these things, because I think that's really kind of where the more interesting things come up, and potentially where some of the better remedies hopefully come up. So, as always, my name is Daniel Vicanti, and for Prateek Singh, I'm going to say good night to everybody and see you in the next episode.
See you next time.